Douglas Murray, thanks for joining us.
It's a great pleasure.
Your latest book, The Madness of Crowds, out now, follows on from best-selling The Strange Death of Europe. That was about immigration and Islam, acclaimed by Michael Gove. Tell us what this piece is about.
The Madness of Crowds is my attempt to explain, I think, take apart and explain what we should do instead of the movement that's called by different names. Sometimes it's called identity politics, sometimes it's called, a very ugly term, intersectionalism. And it's basically the form of thinking, politicking that bases itself around rights issues, almost exclusively around rights issues. And if that sounds sort of abstract, it's not. It's the stuff of everyday's politics in some ways. Issues to do with being gay, issues to do with women, particularly relations between the sexes, issues to do with race, and increasingly issues to do with trans. Some of these, particularly the last one, seemed rather obscure even a few years ago. And they've got right to the heart of the cultural and political wars of our time. And my view is that we are really bad about thinking about these issues, and we're really bad about talking about them. Because whole careers and indeed lives get destroyed by saying the wrong thing, thinking the wrong thing, and often thinking something or saying something that absolutely everybody thought or said until yesterday. And I think there's two things that have been going on in particular on each of these things. The first is we pretend to know more than we do know about some of these issues, particularly the trans one. And on others of these issues, we pretend that we don't know things we all knew till the day before yesterday. Relations between the sexes being one very good example. A very, very good way to destroy your career like that is for a man to talk about women.
The analogy you draw in the beginning of your book is a train pulling into a train station.
Yeah, I mean, I should probably say, none of this suggests that there hasn't been discrimination in the past, and that there may not be some discrimination in parts of our society today. I don't deny any of that. What I say, though, is that by any reasonable estimation, in the last 50 years, all of these rights issues have improved unimaginably. And I think have pretty much got to the point that anyone would have wanted them to get to, which was equality. And there's something very strange that's happened. And I describe it, as you mentioned, in the introduction to The Madness of Crowds. I say it's been like, for me, it's been like watching a train pulling into the destination that you desired for it to be drawing into. And just as you thought it was going to get there, it suddenly got a head of steam, went shooting off down the tracks, off the tracks, and scattering people in its wake. And I think that's the case with each of these issues to do with gay, women, race, and trans. We were getting to or had got to the issue of equality, the position of equality. And then for some people they couldn't cope with equality and they went past equality. This is a really dangerous one. They went past equality to better. And so what we might be in at the moment is an overreach on each of these issues. But I want us not to be in an overreach. I just want us to be able to accept and celebrate actual equality on each of these issues and be able to discuss the things that are still going on, which are complex. Like, we pretend to be much more certain about... gay is the only card I've got on my side that I can play in my own defense, you know. But we pretend to be a lot more certain about what being gay is than we are. We don't actually know that much about it. We don't know much about how it comes about.
Could you elaborate on that?
Sure. I mean, in the gay rights movement, there was a move to... Well, religious people in particular, religious authorities, claimed to say that it was a lifestyle choice. And that wasn't true because, I mean, who would kind of choose to have this extra, problem, certainly when it was illegal, an extra problem in their lives. So the counter to lifestyle choice was to say, no, effectively, gay is the Lady Gaga thing, born this way. We didn't have any choice. Now, I say, and again, I mean, this is a sort of gay heretical thing to say, but we just don't know that much. It may be partly, in fact, since writing my book, a study came out on this that sort of vindicated what I proposed, which is it's probably mainly hardware, but there's a software element to it. And
by that you mean, innate nurture versus something learned.
Yeah, exactly. But it's pretty much agreed there's something to do with developmental issues as well. But we just don't know that much. So one of my suggestions is, let's just not lean this hard on it. Have equal rights, absolutely, but don't do. I mean, what? How can I do it in shorthand? Pride March has, in my own lifetime, turned into Pride Day, Pride Weekend, Pride Week, and now Pride Month. My bank, again, maybe I can say this being a gay man, but my bank advertised this year, "Love happens here," and big rainbow flags happening, everywhere. I don't want love to happen at my bank. I want you to have more people at the tills and at the reception. I want you to not charge me £5 when I lose my back statements and need them again. I don't want you to sort out my sex life or my love life. Thank you very much. But there's this sort of overdoing of everything on these things. And as I say, that's one which we've just got to lean on it a little less heavily. But there's this weaponization of it. And I think that there's also a politicization of each of these issues, which is naked, absolutely naked. You get it in each of the ones I write about. But, I mean, take this as an example. When Kanye West comes out in support of Donald Trump, whatever you think of either Donald Trump or Kanye West, when he comes out in support of Donald Trump, he is denounced in one of the main American magazines by a very prominent black writer in America as no longer being black. This happens repeatedly. Peter Thiel, very prominent gay billionaire, founder of PayPal, comes out for the Republican nominee in America in 2016 and is denounced in the main gay magazine in America as no longer gay. They say he may sleep with men, but in no other way is he gay. They actually say this with a straight face. They expel him from the Church of Gay. Just like some black activists in America tried to expel Kanye West from being black. Another example, Germaine Greer, the most prominent, rightly celebrated feminist of the late 20th century, trips on the trans wire. She says, I'm not willing to say that somebody who was born a man, who transitions in various ways, is a woman. I'm not willing to say it. For that, Germaine Greer is denounced as no longer being a feminist. And if Peter Thiel isn't gay, if Kanye West isn't black, if Germaine Greer isn't a feminist, let's be honest about this. This is naked politicking.
Because Germaine Greer, that row, if you like, centred around university campuses. She was no platformed, etc. And I wondered what you think, whether there's a particular strain of young people who are involved in this position. Is it typically a young person who would hold this view?
Yes, and I think that one of the things we just have to be careful about in all this is we are leaning on ideas that were invented a few years ago. And I think we need some humility in all this. I say this myself as well. I'm very happy to say, and I do in the book, the things we just don't know about. I think to lean this hard on some of these issues is a big mistake. Because if you want actual equality on some of these issues, you can't, among other things, make everything about them because you cause backlash. You can't, for instance, pretend that gay is in fact slightly better than being straight, which is one of the things our culture has started to arrive at. If you support absolutely equal rights for women, as most of us do, you can't then imply that women are actually slightly better than men, as well as being equal. The position that Christine Lagarde of the IMF came to, and she says, we wouldn't have had the banking crash if Lehman Brothers had been Lehman Sisters. And you say, why? Why? Either women are the same as men, or they're not. They can't be the same and better in magical ways. Either skin color is of no significance, which is what I think, and what I hope as a society we can end up thinking. It's just not an interesting issue in our society or lives. Or we say everything is about skin color. in which case we have got all kinds of hell coming our way.
To be clear, your position isn't that racism doesn't exist or that sexism doesn't exist.
Sure.
You just would like to see us move beyond the focus on identity.
What I'm saying is that by highlighting it this much, we aren't bringing ourselves together. We are driving ourselves apart. See, I don't know if you find this, but in the last 10 years in particular, people, in my experience, in Britain, and I travel all the time, and not just in Britain, but in America and elsewhere, they find themselves in this position of describing themselves to you before you know anything else about them. Speaking as a woman, speaking as a gay man, speaking as a gay woman, speaking as a black woman, speaking as a... And you see, we used to be aspiring to something else. The thing we used to be aspiring to was what Dr. Martin Luther King described as judging people by the content of their character. So if you judge people by the content of their character, it doesn't matter what color they are. It doesn't matter who they sleep with or who they love or who they marry. It doesn't matter which sex or gender they are. It matters only what kind of a person they are. What kind of a person they are to the people around them, to their loved ones, and to strangers. But identity politicking, putting our society into atomized groups, which you can then weaponize against each other, does exactly the opposite of that. It says the most important thing are your characteristics. And you see, and if that's the case, then we are all prisoners of how we were born. And that's, among other things, unbelievably fatalistic. Unbelievably fatalistic. So I understand why people in their teens and 20s in particular have, in many cases, imbibed this idea. As I say at the beginning of the book, it's not surprising to me that this social justice movement has come about now, particularly in the last 10 years. In the wake of the banking crisis, people to a considerable extent behave as if it didn't happen. But the consequences of that are still rolling out. The difficulty for young people of accumulating capital, accumulating the money just to put down a deposit on a house or a flat.
Why partake in the system?
Why love capitalism if you don't have any capital? Why celebrate the free market if the free market doesn't allow you to get on the housing ladder? And, worse things have happened in history, but this wasn't what was meant to happen by now, I think. I think a lot of people feel that, and are right to feel that. They weren't expecting to have a worse lifestyle than their parents. And so if you can't get these things, a structure, a belief structure that tells you it can sort out not only every inequality in your own life, but every inequality on the face of the earth, has an attraction, doesn't it?
Attractive, yeah. What impact do you think social media has had on our politics broadly, but specifically on that point of view?
Well, social media has been deranging us, and we have to find a way to live reasonably with it. This goes into the category of things we all knew till yesterday. Let me give one quick example. Obviously, we can all obsess about things like Twitter. They definitely have a dementing effect because they encourage mob crowd mentality. And we know a lot about crowds. We know an awful lot about crowds. We know a lot about mobs. We didn't learn it from Twitter. We know, for instance, the way in which the mob seeks to find a victim or a scapegoat. Often, by the way, a scapegoat guilty of the same thing that the mob has been guilty of itself in the past. But they can wash their guilt by finding the person who behaved in the bad way, knowing that they behaved in a similar way when no one was looking, but they weren't caught, and then you destroy that person. Now, we knew all this. But one of the things I point out in the madness of crowds is, I don't have some people, I've just turned 40. Some people of my age and generation talk about the snowflake generation. And there's something in it. There's definitely a sort of sensitivity that's crept in.
Do you agree with it?
Well, see, I think it's unfair. I think it's an unfair critique. I quote at one point in the book, there's a chapter I write on forgiveness, which is a really unpopular subject these days. I write in the chapter on forgiveness about a philosopher, Hannah Arendt, from the 1950s, an extraordinary woman. And she wrote in the 1950s an amazing essay where she says, the problem for us in the world as human beings has always been the problem of action in the world, because we never knew the consequence of action. And the problem for all of us as human beings is we can never undo what we do. We live in an unundoable world. You say something and you can't take it back. You make a mistake. You can never undo the mistake fully. Now, as Arendt says, what is the only answer to this we've ever had as a species? It is the mechanism of forgiveness. And it's not perfect, but it's the only thing we've ever had. Now, she says this in the 1950s. If action in the world was worrying then, today it is petrifying. And I blame no young person growing up in this world for being terrified of the consequence of words and actions. Because, first of all, a mistake can go round the world and will be with you forever. There are cases I give in the book, like the young girl in America who goes to her school prom and she wears a red Chinese-inspired dress and she takes a photo, a selfie beforehand and says, you know, she puts it up on Instagram, hopes that some people will heart it. She's world famous within 12 hours. Everyone says, oh, was the theme of the prom casual racism and cultural appropriation then? Can you imagine this? You're 17, 18, and the whole world is laughing at you. Who wouldn't learn a lesson from that? Like, just don't even wear the wrong thing. I understand that. But here's the thing. At the time that acting in the world has never been more perilous, our societies spend zero time even thinking about mechanisms of forgiveness. How do you undo a mistake? How does the Chinese prom dress girl ever undo the mistake? She can sidle away and hope the world forgets about her. Okay. Can she ever undo it? Now, I don't know exactly what the answer to it is, but I know we should be thinking about it. And I can't get people to focus on it. The terror of this in the online world is, what if that happens? And I have had so many communications. I've had that before that, but since then as well, from people who are not known, not famous, not ever written a book, and who something like that has happened to. And it is a dementing thing to happen to you, particularly if you have no response. And my own view on this is that we have to be more unforgiving of the perpetrators of such lies and more forgiving of the victims of such lies. And here's the thing. We will all make mistakes in our lives. Like, we will all say wrong things. We'll all think wrong things. We'll all try things out and then think, oh God, why did I do that? We'll all make mistakes in our personal relationships in our lives. And we should expect that. But to be forgiving of other people is also to ask to be treated in the same light yourself in due course, because it will happen to you. You will have need of that. And by the way, that's the case with the past as well. We have in our societies imbibed an incredibly unforgiving attitude toward the past. You know, our attitude today is, because we live after the past, we know better than it. There are some things we know more about. We know about penicillin now. It's not like our forebears were stupid because they didn't know about penicillin, or that we're better than them because of it. I don't know more than Plato because I know about antibiotics.
Very humble of you.
You know? And I don't mind admitting it. There you go. But we have this view that, particularly with historical figures, that we're better and wiser, and therefore we get to judge them. Now, this isn't to say that you don't make the point historically, you know, that was wrong in history, that we wouldn't do that now. But we should I mean, this comes to the sort of thing of tearing down statues and eradicating texts from the past, and indeed disappearing people from the past if they didn't share the views that we have in 2019. And one of my rules is consider that we are the same as everyone who went before in most ways. And that just as they did things which we look back at and think, what were they thinking? Assume we're doing some things like that too, and try to work out what they might be. Now, by the way, and also because that's to be forgiving to the past, they say, is to ask for forgiveness from our successors, because we know we'll need it too, or at least to be treated in a gentler light. And I give an example. I know this is going to be very controversial, but of all the subjects I tackle, the trans issue has been the one that's come furthest, fastest, and I think we know least about. And I explain really carefully in the chapter, and I think more in depth than I've seen anywhere else, what the bits of the claim are that are plausible and which the things are that we've got to be really careful about, like giving drugs to children, experimenting on children. And I give an example of this in this book at the opening of the trans chapter, which I know is going to be controversial, but it's really worth considering that it'll go into the box of what our successors say they did what. And it's the case of a Belgian man who was born a woman and in an all-male household, surrounded by brothers. Parents were clearly absolute shits. And it was obviously a horrible environment for her. And at some point in the teens, this girl thought that it might be better if she was a boy, and started taking hormones in her 20s, has several operations to become a man. They're not as successful as he wishes. There's serious scarring. And of course in Belgium there's euthanasia is available on the state. And after the third attempt to transform herself into a man, she gets depressed at the results and is killed on the state. Now, I would submit that the people who come after us will say, the Belgians did what in the 2010s? They did what? And they did it in the name of kindness? They tried to turn the woman into a man and then killed her?
How culpable do you think the tech companies are in this?
The tech companies have a huge responsibility. They are, this can't be stressed enough, they are making money from our madness. Their business model relies on us seeking out and destroying the errant opinion in our society. It's a disgusting business model, and we've all fallen into the trap. You know, every hour that we spend online piling in on somebody because, wow, some people have different opinions. Every hour we spend doing that, we add to the recrimination in our culture. And the only other thing we add to is the pockets of the tech companies. We need to rethink this. We need to think, are we being the people we actually want to be? Or are we playing a game that Silicon Valley, under the pretense that it is merely doing good, is actually doing something that's driving us mad?
To take an example then, Sam Smith came out and he said that he would like to be viewed as non-binary. That's how he identifies. You wrote a column about it, something which you posted on Twitter, and you know, drove a lot of engagement on Twitter. Mm-hmm. You could posit actually that you're very good at playing the game that the social media companies want to play.
Well, I actually don't engage on social media. I use Twitter as a publishing platform. I write pieces and I appear on television and whatever, and I alert readers to it via Twitter. I do almost no engagement on Twitter because I worked out pretty much early on that it wasn't going to show me in my best light because it didn't show anyone in their best light. So I avoided it. But that particular issue, well, that's a very interesting issue, and I'm a little out there on it because...
Vociferous in that column, I would say.
Vociferous, yeah, sure. Well, because I don't think that non-binary exists. Or at least persuade me, you know? Don't tell me it exists. Persuade me it exists. And I've had nobody in the almost week since I wrote that column even attempt to persuade me. You see, here are some of the questions. What's the difference between what he said he was before, which was genderqueer, and being non-binary? I don't think there is a difference. Persuade me. If I wanted to play the game that the identity politics people play, I would say this is offensive to me as a gay man. I would say he is disappearing gay people. All of that are plausible, I think rather pitiful claims to make. But that's actually not the problem I have with this. The problem I have with it, among other things, is no one has explained to me the difference between coming out as genderqueer or non-binary and just saying, look at me, pay me attention. And I don't think that sex is an abstract thing. I don't think being a woman and being a man is something that you perform, as one of the maddening claims of our time is. I think that chromosomes matter. They aren't the only thing that matter in our lives, but they definitely matter.
What about politeness?
Politeness matters too, but here's the thing. I'm not going to mutilate the language because of something you feel today. So if I said to you, I feel like a space hopper today, and you've got to refer to me as such, and also say that no such thing as sex exists, would you do it?
That's one extreme. I would counter.
It's not that extreme.
Well, no, but let's go to the other end of the scale. Let's say, let's say someone's called John. He's named John after his father.
Mm-hmm.
His father abuses him.
Mm-hmm.
Later in life, he no longer wishes to be known as John.
Mm-hmm.
He wishes to be known by his middle name. Let's say it's Douglas or Ollie, whatever.
Sure.
Would you accept that? Would you say, you know what, I'll no longer call you John?
Of course.
What's the difference between that and asking to be known as non-binary?
If that person said, and you have to pretend that I was called my new name on my birth certificate, that invites me into a lie. Okay? Mm-hmm. It wouldn't be the biggest thing in the world, by the way, in that case. But if they said, look, I'm now called Ollie, and I was always called Ollie, and don't you dare pretend, even if you find my birth certificate and it says John on it, don't pretend it doesn't say Ollie. Mm-hmm. Do I agree to the little lie or not? And you see, my belief is that we are being invited in to join in little lies. And some of it is annoying, some of it is unimportant. Some people say that mutilating the language and doing they, them instead of he, him is no particular problem. And when I say I went to they concert and them was good or whatever, that's no problem. I think it's at the very least presumptuous to do that. Particularly presumptuous to do that if you haven't even worked out or argued what it is. Sam Smith says, by the way, in that thing, I don't know what it is to be non-binary. I look forward to the day I can come back and explain. In the meantime, all change the language whilst you're waiting for me. But that's not the bit that bothers me about it, especially. The bit that bothers me is I don't like lies. I just don't like them. My view on the trans thing, for instance, is I always say, I do call people by the name they ask me to call them, sure. But I won't then pretend, as I say, that chromosomes don't exist. And why I say this and why I'm one of these people who on this ends up getting grief for this, but it's worth it, is because I know from societies that have gone wrong that one of the ways in which societies go wrong is when lies become embedded. And in a way it matters less how big the lie is to begin with. But it matters because lies are profoundly demoralizing. I've traveled all across the world. I've seen some unbelievable sites and places and societies that have gone so badly wrong. North Korea, for instance. And we don't live in a North Korea, obviously. But when you see a truly destroyed society, one of the things that is always at the root of it is that the population have to agree to things they know aren't true. Because if you agree to the thing that you know isn't true today, you will agree to another set of untruths tomorrow. None of this is to say be unpleasant to people. Obviously not. Obviously not. But don't demand that we agree to things we don't think are true. Or at the very least, let's discuss it. Don't shut it down.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think, you've couched it in terms there of almost an existential threat to our society by comparing it to North Korea there? I'd be inclined, when looking at trans people, to view them as, a minority group, a very small group, a group with a high suicide rate, a group of people who are vulnerable, essentially. I don't see necessarily a threat to our way of life in the same way.
I don't see a threat to the way of life.
Go on.
No, I see a threat to a whole set of things we ought to be discussing. Let me give you an example.
Absolutely.
So the gay rights movement, as I mentioned earlier, gets success when it moves from saying this is a software issue to this is a hardware issue. And as I say, we're a bit more certain about that than we should be. But basically, we agree it's Lady Gaga. It's born this way. The trans movement learned from this and in very short time has gone from saying this is a software issue to insisting this is a hardware issue. One of the reasons why our society is going demented on this particular question is because we're trying to run two programs simultaneously and we can't. We're trying at the same time as we say that trans is a hardware issue to follow the pretense that being a woman is a software issue. You can't do both those things. You can't insist that being trans is a fundamental thing of hardware in our species, but that being a woman or a man is something you choose as you go along. It's just not possible.
Do a lot of people elucidate that view? Because my understanding is that a lot of people would say, I don't think anyone's always necessarily as explicit as that, as, I'm a trans woman, therefore I am a woman. I know there are people who hold that position, but I don't know how widely held it is, to be honest with you.
It's very widely held within trans activism, certainly. Look, as I say, my own attitude on all this stuff is pretty live and let live. I think once you're an adult, I have views, I have preferences, you might even say prejudices, which we all have. And prejudices sometimes are a good thing. I have a prejudice about which things I prefer to what I don't. We all do a bit of that in our lives.
So it becomes discrimination, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. When an adult makes a choice, they can make what choice they want. But for instance, is it inevitable, therefore, that we don't ask some of the questions I ask in this book about this? No. See, I've spoken to an awful lot of not just trans people, but of parents of people who are trans or who think that's what they are. And I'm very, very uncomfortable about embedding some of the ideas we have on this, because I think that a lot of people in their teens and younger are going to go through an awful lot of pain over this. I have spoken to people who, for instance, thought they might be trans, went some way down the road, and then realized they weren't. Around 80% of cases of young people diagnosed with gender dysphoria, there aren't many studies, but one study showed around 80% of people who are diagnosed as having gender dysphoria actually turn out to be gay. So again, by the way, if I wanted to play this in an identity politics way, I could say, well, I can think of quite a lot of gay men and women I know who you would have told they weren't gay, who you would have told they should take hormones, who you would told they should have surgery and become.
Conversion therapy.
My point is right. Just after we thought we'd ended that stuff, that's happening. That's happening. That isn't science fiction. That's happening. I've spoken to people that's happening with. Again, if something runs, all of these issues are presented, particularly to young people, as if they are all interlocking issues which you need to address simultaneously, and they all share the same characteristics. So, this is the sort of so-called intersectionist thing. We live in a web of interlocking problems and prejudices and oppressions and so on. And if we address one, we address them all. No, it's not the case. All these things run against each other. As I just showed, the trans thing runs to a considerable extent, not completely, but to a considerable extent against certainly a large part of the feminist movement. And it clearly runs against a large part of the gay movement, gay people. So that's why we need to be able to think about this stuff more intelligently and more openly. And that's why, sometimes, occasionally people say, why do you have to say that? I think, because I think we should be talking about it. I think we should be talking better about all of these things. I think we can do it in a decent way. I think we can do it without being prejudiced against anyone. But I think that if we talk about this badly or if we suppress this, I know that a lot of what I say in The Madness of Crowds, everybody is thinking about. I know a lot of what I say is what a lot of people are saying privately to their partners and friends. And I know that almost all of them fear saying it in public. Here's the thing. Thinking can't be this dangerous. Can't be. We have to allow ourselves to do it. And that includes taking risks, making mistakes, sure. But we can't just agree to whatever we're told to agree to today. Or at least some people may, but I won't.
You write in the book about how gay rights, bisexual rights have been combined into this LGBT category. So following on from our discussion of trans rights, I wanted to ask you, as a gay man, is there any other time in history in which you would have liked to have lived other than today?
No, and I'd ask that question of absolutely everybody today. It's one of the things, I don't want to just diagnose this. I want us to get out of it. I want us to do better things. A friend of mine was recently speaking at a university in America, and all the students were asking about, all of these issues, all these intersectional issues, all these identity politics issues. And he said, I don't understand. You should be trying to work out how we live in underwater cities. You should be trying to work out how we live on the moon. You shouldn't be doing this crap. And that's my view as well. So how do we get out of it? What should we be doing? And one of the ways we can get out of some of the dementing attitude of our time is exactly what you've just asked. When was it better? Okay, we have all sorts of problems in our world today. Sure. And in our society, absolutely. There are inequalities that exist. There are inequities. There is unfairness, definitely. Is it possible to solve all of that unfairness? I would say no. Does that mean that we don't do anything? No. But seriously, when apart from now would you rather be living? That's the case on all of these things. And I think to a great extent the hysterical attitude of our time is coming about because in some way we can't cope with our luck, or we don't recognize our luck. And there is a possibility that we pull the whole damn thing down because of that. So, I know that the revolutionary attitude and the heroic attitude and the campaigning attitude and the barricades attitude has a whole load of advantages and attractions to it. I know that. But there is another force in our societies, in our world, we should also have, which is the restraining force on ourselves and on others. We say, be careful. Be careful. Because if you risk this, you might find that absolutely everything else is worse. And that is the case historically. I have a lot of friends from Iran, among other countries. And, it's an extreme example, but 1978 in Iran, if you're a liberal, was a good time. There were lots of problems. By 1980, it was so much worse, and it's been worse ever since. Societies can go wrong, and they can go backwards, and they can get infinitely worse at the point that people think they're making them better. So, yes, address these things, try to work them out, try to stop unfairness and unpleasantness where you can, but be very careful not to wage war on everything that got you everything that's better than anything.
Douglas Murray, thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.